Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Daly. Welcome to Answers for November 16th, 2020. In this edition of Answers, there will be a school update with yours truly. Our information specialist, Cindy Curtis, will supply a point of information. Our school at home specialist, Audra Talbot, will provide a school at home report. My guest this edition is clinical psychologist Dr. Adrian Smaller of Madison, who I will interview. During our interview, we encourage Q&A with participants, so get ready to send over a question if you have it, and don't wait until the end. We want to hear from you. Send it your question as soon as you have it. Answers is brought to you by PATH, Parent to Parent, Family Voices of Connecticut. It's a nonprofit organization which for more than 30 years has served the needs of children and families in Connecticut. Everything that PATH offers to families is at no cost to the families we serve. And in front of you, you see a partial list of PATH's programs and services. Something I'd like to point out, something that's coming up, something that's important. Are you interested in quality merchandise at bargain prices? Now, and let's face it, who isn't? Then you should know about PATH's online auction. It starts on November 27th, also known as Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. And you could get to the auction using the link you see at the bottom of your screen. This would be a good time to take a screenshot so you can use the link later. The PATH online auction is an opportunity to do some end-of-year shopping easily and conveniently. And because all the auction items were donated to PATH, 100% of your purchase money will be used to further our cause to support children and families. If you want more information about PATH, please visit our website at pathct.org. If you have any questions about this webinar, please contact me directly at this email address in front of you. And while you're online, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Here's the fine print, folks. This webinar is not intended to be legal advice or healthcare advice or advice of any kind. It's a webinar about looking for answers. This webinar is the property of PATH and is not to be used for any other purpose without the express written permission of PATH. And now, the school report for November 16th. Today, November 16th, we are well into the school year. Schools across the nation have been in business for a while. They've been operating under 3 instructional models: full in-person learning, full remote learning, and the hybrid model. These are the parts of the nation where the virus is surging, and officials in these areas are taking steps to contain it. A trend we are seeing is taking a temporary move to full remote instruction. For example, in Detroit, in-person instruction was banned recently due to coronavirus concerns. All schools in Detroit will be on full remote instruction until further notice. Schools in Pittsburgh are moving to full remote as of today. In-person learning was suspended in Boston last month. At the same time, in parts of the nation where the virus is more contained and infection rates are lower, schools are continuing full-time instruction. For example, in New York City, where infection rates are relatively low, in-person learning is still being maintained for now. Let's see how things look on the national level. Right now, in 38 states, decisions on in-person instruction are left up to local school districts. Their state departments of education provide guidance only. Connecticut is one of those states. Many school districts in these states are shifting from the hybrid model to full in-person instruction. In 8 states, full-time instruction is not allowed in person in certain regions by state order, or it's available only for certain grades. Hybrid instruction may be allowed. A good example is New York State, which recently became one of these states. In New York, the state designates communities that are COVID-19 hotspots. Schools in these hotspots must close for at least 4 days. Before they can reopen, all the students and staff must be tested. Even after a school reopens, comprehensive testing has to continue. Schools that can't meet these requirements must go to full remote learning until the infection rate in the hotspot goes down. In these 4 states, school districts have been ordered by the state to make in-person instruction available to all students in all grades, either full-time or part-time. Florida recently became one of these states in October. Interesting story. A state-issued emergency order requires schools to open at least 5 days a week, and this emergency order at one time had been overturned in court, but it was upheld on appeal on October 9th. The Florida Education Association, which is a teachers' union, intends to appeal the decision. Put it all together and you can see how things stand nationwide. And it's not too different from my last report a month ago, with the only change being New York State going red. But it's quite different from what this map looked like in August when schools were reopening. Some states that you see in different colors were still deciding how to reopen. But the important point here is that there was just one red state with state mandated closures. There were 2, rather. There were 2, and now it's 8. So just from August to November, we now have 8 states where there are state mandated closures. Also worth mentioning are the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, where all schools are closed for in-person learning. It's remote learning only. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, our state has seen its share of temporary moves to remote instruction too. For example, over the past weekend, the Hamden Public Schools decided to move to full remote instruction. That's from November 23rd to January 19th. Last week, the Shelton Public Schools moved to full remote instruction for the rest of the calendar year. The Danbury schools are closed to in-person instruction, and that's until January. Statewide, more than half of Connecticut school districts are opening fully in-person for full in-person instruction, while about 38 are using the hybrid model, and about 9% are going full remote. And of course, the question should be asked, how does all this affect special education students? You know, it's a given that the challenges faced by typical students are magnified in students with disabilities. Adjusting to new procedures at school can be overwhelming for some of our children. Engaging with a computer at home for remote instruction can be downright impossible for some of them. And then there is the COVID slide. This is a term that arose with the pandemic. It corresponds to what's called the summer slide. It's the regression all children experience while school is closed during summer break. Combating summer slide is one reason why schools offer summer programs to their students. It's why after summer break, the first month of school is devoted to reviewing previous instruction before new material is introduced. And summer slide is an unequal slide. Some students with disabilities are affected by the slide more than others. That's why IDEA, the federal law that created special education, requires schools to provide extended school year programs during the summer to special education students who need it. What's different about the COVID slide is that it's happening now while school is in session. When instruction is done in person or remotely, doesn't seem to matter. Some students are not making progress, and some of them are showing signs of regression. Like the summer slide, it's an unequal slide, and special education students are more at risk for it. What can be done to combat the COVID slide? What can be done to prevent it in special education students? Coming up, I'll be asking our guest, clinical psychologist Adrienne Smaller, for her answers to this situation. But first, a point of information from our information specialist, Cindy Curtis.
Tonight, on Point of Information, we're going to talk again about parents' rights under federal and state laws. Specifically, what we're going to talk about are your rights as parents and best practices that will lead to better PPT outcomes. All PPT meeting participants are actually required to remain for the duration of the meeting. The exception of this is if you as a parent agree that they're no longer needed. Often this doesn't happen in PPT meetings, but it's important to know that that is your right. Members invited to a PPT meeting should always expect to remain for the entire time. I would suggest using your best judgment. If an individual's departure, I think a good example is a nurse, will not impact the discussion or the outcome, and it may be appropriate to agree and allow them to leave. It should never feel like a revolving door. It's really important for the continuity of the conversation and the meeting and decisions being made that you don't have people continuously kind of floating in and out of your meeting. Also, if a school participant cannot attend a PPT meeting, I would suggest as a best practice that you request an update in writing that can be shared with the team. Request this as a standard practice for your PPT meetings. If you'd like, send a quick reminder to the team prior to the meeting if necessary until they get into the habit of just doing this automatically. You have the right to record your child's PPT meeting. Notify the school administrator of your plan to do this. As a courtesy, you should always, like I said, inform the school that you will be recording. The school district may also plan to record the meeting. And as a courtesy, always offer a copy of your recording if the school chooses not to record or doesn't have a recorder available to them. You have a right to bring any individual to a PPT meeting for either their support or for their area of expertise. Avoid attending PPT meetings alone. Bring your spouse, bring a partner, bring a friend. It's always good to have an extra pair of eyes and ears in a meeting. When you are planning to invite an advocate, a pediatrician, someone because of their area of expertise, always notify the school team. It's a courtesy, but it'll also allow the meeting to run much more smoothly. Also, in the day of Zoom and online meetings, request that the school add additional attendees to both the invite list and that they're sent a link to the upcoming meeting. PPT meetings are required to be scheduled at a mutually agreeable time for both the school staff and parents. If you've got a flexible schedule, great. If not, working with the meeting scheduler can be really helpful. Request a couple dates and times to select from. Once you determine the time that'll work for you, notify the school promptly. The person that schedules all these meetings is doing many at once, and they're trying to hold times and calendars. And so I think it's just important to be respectful of that. And as soon as you know, give them a shout and let them know. PPT meetings can be held year-round, not just when school is in session. And this may be something different than what you typically hear from school districts, but in fact, they can be. Logistically, it can be difficult for the school to obtain all the necessary staff during certain times of year, whether it's over a holiday break, whether it's over the summer. So I think, honestly, that's why they often prefer not to do it, because it is difficult for them. However, if there's really a truly valid reason, then it should be requested and it should be scheduled no matter what time of year it is. An example of this would be if there's a determination if your child is going to be either in district or out of district for their placement for that academic year. PPT meetings do not have a legally defined duration. Meetings should be scheduled to allow for all informations and concerns to be addressed. Many school districts, from a scheduling perspective, from trying to contain and get as many in on time as they can, they have a defined amount of time for their PPT meetings. However, if you don't believe it'll be enough time, request a longer time to be scheduled. Some school districts will push back on this. If it's not possible to extend it, then request a follow-up meeting as soon as possible. But it really logistically becomes much more difficult for parents, right? Whether you're taking time off from work so it really, for lots of reasons, makes a lot of sense just to allocate the appropriate amount of time. It's important to know that IEPs are legal documents. They cannot be modified without either holding a PPT meeting or signing an addendum of agreement. This is the law, and it's never legal to make any changes without your knowledge or consent. PPT meeting can and should be requested based on need. There's no set number of meetings that can be held within a calendar year. Children with IEPs are not allotted a certain number of PPT meetings per year. I would ask, and you should be sensitive to all team members' times, but if there really is a need or concern that continues without being addressed appropriately, it's your right to call a PPT meeting. The goal of PPT meetings is to resolve concerns, not to simply meet. When testing or evaluations are being presented in your child's upcoming PPT meeting, always request that the results be made available to you prior to the scheduled meeting. If it's an initial evaluation, by law, they need to provide this to you 3 days prior to the meeting. For all other evaluations, request results to be sent to you either as soon as they're available or at least 3 days prior to the scheduled meeting. Many school districts now are reaching out to parents and offering to review the test results before the meeting takes place. I think this is terrific that they're doing this now. Take advantage of it if at all possible. If you want to invite your child's paraprofessional to a meeting, request in writing, email's fine, his or her attendance at least 5 days prior to the schedule. There may be times, depending on the level of interaction of the para with your child, that this individual will have more information of what's going on than other members of the PPT. Their attendance can also provide direct feedback and communication for program or schedule changes. You do not have to agree to allow the school district to communicate with outside providers or agencies. School districts must have parental consent. This is important. I think what I find in a lot of meetings is the school hands over the consent to be signed as if it's just kind of routine and, you know, it automatically happens. That's absolutely not the case. The decision's yours. If you believe it will help in supporting your child in school, agreeing can work well. If you have concerns, hold off, talk to your provider, or ask your provider to submit helpful information in writing. If you're feeling uncomfortable in a PPT meeting saying no, say that you'll take the form home and you'll get back to them on it. You can always withdraw your consent at any time. In summary, always work with your school district to create a positive, solid working relationship. It's in the best interest for you and for your child. However, the balance to that is following best practices, along with all of our state and federal laws, will provide better outcomes for you and your child in all your PPT meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, for that point of information. The next edition of Answers will be on Tuesday, December 8th, 2020, 6 p.m. Please join us. And now it's time for the School at Home report with Audra Talbot. Audra?
I have the privilege of having Mary Kay, a parent of 2 children in the special education system, joining me tonight. And we're just going to have a conversation about some thoughts and some concerns that she has, and hopefully lend some knowledge to other parents out there who are watching tonight. Mary Kay, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Regarding you, so you have 2 children who are special education students. Could you tell us a little bit about them and how they're the same and how there's differences in them?
I have 2 children in special education right now. One is my daughter, who is 17, senior on an IEP. My son is 9. He's in 2nd grade, also on IEP. My daughter has a diagnosis of autism, and she has a lot of social anxiety. And my son has a dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism. And he's pretty severely affected by the autism. He is nonverbal. And they are very different. She is very artsy, and she likes fashion, and she likes anime and music and things like that. And my younger son is, I guess you could say he's musical too. He likes his musical plushes and listens to those repetitively. So he likes to be outside. You know, he enjoys playing when not in school.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that with us so far. So what special education services does your son have? And then what services does your daughter have?
My son receives pretty full support in school. So he is, for his present levels of functioning, none are age appropriate. So he receives a one-to-one paraprofessional throughout the day. He has a ABA consultant for his programming. He has speech and language therapy. He uses assistive technology at school, and that comes home as well. He uses Proloquo to go on an iPad for communicating mostly his needs. Sometimes sometimes some wants, and he's starting to learn it to use it for some classroom activities, especially now with this remote learning. Yeah, and did I say OT? OT as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the sensory kind of issues that he has, feeding, that's all part of his programming.
Okay. How about your daughter?
She is, when she was in school, she is fully remote right now.
Okay.
So all of her learning is online, obviously. Prior to COVID, she did some independent learning already. So what I would already consider online type of courses, meaning she was just an independent learner, and she used a program called Edgenuity for certain courses that she couldn't participate in a full class. You know, it was either overwhelming or she was having a hard time accessing what was happening in the classroom because of her anxiety. So, so that is continued. She still does do some independent learning for one of her classes, and the other, she is doing remote learning. If she had been in school, she would have different rooms, you know, a different setting for test taking. She has extended time for test taking. She has access to counseling because of some of the emotional issues that she was having. And so she has it if she needs it right now, and she also meets one-to-one sessions throughout the week with her special education case manager, you know, the teacher there.
Okay. So you mentioned you chose to do remote learning and full in-person learning for your son. So as far as which school district, which in your school district is 4 days a week? I just want to point that out for your son.
Right.
So he's in person 4 days a week, and then he has remote learning 1 day a week. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So you chose full-time remote instruction at home for your daughter. Could you tell the people watching for us tonight why and pretty much how you came to that decision?
Well, for my daughter, you know, she is 17. And so she was a big part of the decision making for why that happened. Our thoughts were that she would benefit more from being at home, partly because we saw it in action in the spring. So when we were forced to be home in March through the end of the school year, there was no other option. So everybody had to go right to online. And I know some people really struggled with it, but she did really well. And she was actually recognized by the principal as one of the remote learners who did very well. And so she was able to, organization is hard, but once we came up with a little schedule for her and what needed to be done, she was able to take that and run with it. And I think it really helped to have me so close to her with the organization piece. And so I think that we thought, well, it's worked for her in the spring, so we'll continue with that. She also, we had some issues prior to COVID, even though it happened coinciding with the COVID shutdown. We kind of began to have a couple of issues with the district and with some of the things that the services that she was receiving. So the timing of it all really worked in her favor for us to pull back and be remote and reassess how things were going for her programming at the school, at the district. So her decision to continue with remote was fully supported by my husband and I. We thought that was probably a good thing, as we do like that she still has friends that she sees, and she still has an activity that she does outside of school, just to try to keep a social piece going. And for my son, he does not connect at all with computer type of learning, programs that they were trying to send home that were on the computer, where even if it was touching the screen, he he did not have a connection with that at all. So when the chance came for him to go back to school, that was definitely preferred. and he was very happy to go back. He was very excited to go back and see the bus coming, and yeah. So he enjoys it.
Yeah, I can share with you. So it's kind of, our lives are very parallel, except I had the opposite of the girl and boy. I have 2 kids with autism as well. And when my son was ready to go back to school, he ran out of my house and down to his car. Like, he was just like, see ya, Mom. Yeah. So I can just envision that for you. Like, there's like, oh,
yeah, I know. My goodness. I know. They just, some are just so anxious to get back, and
I know
they love their schools. So that's good. I'm happy for that. But
yeah. Well, I'm glad that your daughter found kind of her place in remote learning, because that's, I'm finding with kids, regardless of the age, it's hard to know that ahead of time. And then it was almost like that was our test, was the beginning of COVID, and they're flourishing in this remote. I know, because the individual instruction for them is just student based. Like, they just, plus we're there to kind of push them a little bit too.
yeah, we could see what's going on, and it was very nice. And you're right. I mean, you take a certain piece out of the equation as far as the group setting, and what all that goes with it. The social pressures and all of that kind of thing. So it really let her focus on just an academic piece, which she wasn't really able to do fully when she was in person. Yeah, definitely opened up eyes to like what could be possible, and how she how she benefits from it.
I always say, and I've said this to other parents too, that from my personal experience, it's almost like the silver lining that I get to see when my daughter is doing her remote learning. When we first started all this, she really does well with it. And then for my son, he was like, "Oh, Mom, see ya."
Yeah.
So I just want to ask, yeah. So as far as for your son's school day, what is it like when he has remote instruction? Now, you did already mention that the access for him is very limited, even with the touch screen and those types of programs that they send home. And how did he get through that?
In the spring or now? Since he's been
now.
Yeah, okay. So in the spring, I would say in the spring, forget it. We ended up, I was emailing the teachers and calling them and saying, I need things to do here that are hands-on, tactile. I got to have things for him to do here. And they were very accommodating for that. But once the fall started and he was back in person, it was harder at first to do the remote, but you could tell as the weeks went on and he started to probably recognize and spend time with his peers in the classroom and his teacher. Then when we were home looking at them on screen, he started to recognize them. And then he was more engaged now than, say, September. So I think it's because he can see the kids on screen, he sees his teacher, and then he likes to listen to their voices and he likes to look at them. So that's helpful. That's definitely helpful. His being familiar with the rest of his class, and knowing too, because they also do. Part of his day is in the inclusive room. Part of his day is what I call the resource room, or the room where his special education teacher is and his para. So when he's in that room, one of his goals is to have the computer there, and then do the remote learning from that room so that they can help him, talk to him about what's happening on the screen there. And, that could be helping too, what I'm seeing at home, because he went from about maybe taking place because they have a morning meeting on those days where he's remote. In the beginning, it was maybe 4 or 5 minutes that he would be engaged. And now it's probably 20 or 25 minutes where he is sitting for the meeting. Yes. And, you know, he listens to them. He looks at them all. Sometimes she's read a story and he stays into, I think he just likes her voice and likes to see that. And so he stays engaged for that period of time. So that's nice to see too.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. And I bet you it is that they're doing that during the morning meeting and right afterwards with the computer. I mean, you and I both know that that's how children with autism learn, that repetitive kind of learning. And then in all environments.
Yes, right. Yes. For sure. Yeah. So I think that they are just really repeating that and having him have access to that throughout the day. So definitely helpful for him. And I'm just so happy that that I can see his classmates too. I kind of like it because it's nice that I can see everybody in the class and how they speak to each other. And they always include my son when they're doing their morning greeting, and he replies using his iPad, which is his Proloquo system. Hello, you know, whoever, you know, so they appreciate that.
So your daughter is a high school senior, and her IEP has a transition plan. Are you satisfied how your daughter's transition plan is being carried out under the current circumstances?
Yeah, my daughter's transition plan is an interesting part of all this. It was actually, you know, am I satisfied? I'm probably more satisfied because I know what's happening right now with it. Am I completely satisfied? No, you know, I do think that in normal circumstances, they would probably have, you know, perhaps an internship or perhaps some more hands-on type of activities they could be going into the community with to teach her things, you know, banking. I know transportation, they were going to be using some of her, they have a period where they would use that for this year transition. And now she's doing more assessments, interviews, so they're worksheets, you know, that kind of thing. However, when everything hit back in March, like I said, she's a senior. Now, ideally, she would have been doing a lot of transition throughout her high school years. Unfortunately, with our district, that wasn't really happening. And it came out when she came home because they were sending these worksheets home that had to do with transition. And she was saying, what is this? We never do this. I've never seen this before. And we were like, yeah, so it was kind of a little disheartening to think that, but at the same time, probably a good thing that we could really see what was going on, and then we could really start a dialogue and open up communication with the school about what was going on, why things were not happening. So in some ways, I think her transition really moved forward because of the transparency that was forced back in March of what is really happening with this goal, or, you know, with this course that, you know, this block of time that she was supposed to be using that for. So that was, you know, mixed blessing. You know, we definitely could see firsthand what was happening. Yeah. And so maybe things are better than they would have been. I can't answer that for sure, but I can just say that I'm glad that we see what's happening and that we can see what's going on. And we definitely communicate more with the school based on that experience. And they are communicating with us as well. So that's probably been, you know, a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like it sounds like it's a mixed blessing. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, it's good that you saw it because you would never have known. That's it, and that's my stance on that. It's all of that stuff we see now as parents when our kids are home, and we're learning good and bad. You know, the curriculum, and then, you know, kind of the holes. And right. So as advocates for our children, we can go forward and say, hey, you know, could you tell me about this a little bit more? What can we do to make this better?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And just hope that they're, you know, open in their responses. And I know you mentioned too, Audra, what our challenge is right now, and I would think that this would be a challenge across the board for parents that have kids in special ed, which is how much the district falls back on, well, this is COVID. Well, we're in a pandemic, and as much as I'm sympathetic to that. I agree that it's challenging for everybody, and we have to kind of regroup somewhat. But I don't like hearing it as the excuse for some things that I think could be happening very readily right now. Pandemic or not, it should be happening. So. That's challenging. That's challenging because you don't want to be seen as the insensitive, parent to, what's really happening in our district, in our schools, and how much effort we're putting forward. Yes, for sure. But, there's still some things that can happen, COVID or not. So that's
agreed. There's still an IEP in place. And so, and unfortunately, I do see a lot of that. And then I always start the sentence with, we really appreciate the time and effort you're putting into this, but here are our concerns. Yeah, because I do appreciate what teachers and paras and related services are doing. I mean, there's teachers I know that are really, they're so burnt out because they're just giving 150% all the time. Yeah, they are. And so I can appreciate that about them. And they're doing it because they want to, they're doing it because that's the job they chose, because they want to put that goodness into the world and work with our children. And so I appreciate that.
Right.
But the IEP is not being implemented to the highest extent
possible
regarding our circumstances. Yeah. And so let's keep them out of the box thinking about these things, kind of thing. Yeah.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I mean, I think, on both sides. Yeah. There's, you got to listen to both sides on that one, too.
Always.
So, yeah.
I always do, Mary Kay.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So schooling children at home during a global pandemic can be stressful. So I'm sure we could talk for hours about that. What do you do personally as a parent to handle that stress? Like, what are some positive things you do? I can say for myself, like I hike, or I get on my stationary bike when my kids are sleeping. Like I just, I'm a physical person. It helps decrease my stress level.
Yep.
But what do you do personally?
I do like to get outside, definitely get outside a lot. We took advantage a lot of the parks, state parks that were open.
Yeah.
Doing that kind of thing, go for walks. I exercise at night, usually when everyone's gone to bed, right?
Yeah.
That's the time to exercise and do that, get in touch with friends, and, just do whatever I think of as relaxing, like Sudoku puzzles or, those kinds of things, your favorite show. And that's just kind of, whatever. And you can just kind of have a little bit of time in the day that's just yours. And as far as with my kids, we did a lot of drives with music. So, my younger son, it's because of different limitations that he has, it's hard to take him into public places. So we didn't do, except for the state parks. There's no public places he could really go. So we would do state parks or long drives with music going, and we all kind of enjoy that. So, yeah. It's going to be tough this winter. I feel for
yeah. I'm gonna put their snowsuits on them and their boots, and we're going out for a hike in Burlington. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I'm still gonna put them outside.
Because you have to. Fresh air. You gotta have it. You gotta have it.
Agreed. Well, thank you for sharing your story and what you do in your personal life. I truly appreciate it. And I wish you so much luck. And I know that we're all going to get through this somehow.
I think so too. I'm sure that we will. And thank you so much for having me and letting me talk to you. It was nice to see you.
It was nice to see you too. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Audra and Mary Kay. And now my live interview with Adrienne Smaller, clinical psychologist. She's been a clinical psychologist for over 25 years. She's on the faculty of the Yale Child Study Center. She also has a private practice in Madison, where she works with children who have learning issues. And she's also a great friend of this webinar, having appeared here a number of times. Dr. Smaller, wherever you are, I'm going to stop the screen. Oh, there you are. Dr. Smaller, welcome back to Answers.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for inviting me.
Earlier, I mentioned the COVID slide and its effect on special education students. Are you seeing signs of the COVID slide in the children you work with?
Yes, and I think that the slide that you showed was from the Northwest Education Association, a research group that did work on the summer slide of our students and used that as a model. What in my search for taking a look at some of the statistics on it, I was pretty shocked to see that they were predicting that students were going to retain, and this is sort of typical students, were going to retain 70% of the year's skills in reading and retain only 50% of the year's gain in skills in math. So if you take that as the typical model, great concern about our children on IEPs and children with learning issues in terms of what we're experiencing and what we're seeing. And I'm hearing from parents across the board in terms of regression, the slide, things that are reappearing that they haven't seen for a long time. For example, disfluency in speech for some of our kids who struggle in the area of language and communication, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of difficulty focusing no matter what the model is. So I'm certainly concerned about our children, and I can certainly understand the parents. It was wonderful to hear from Audra and Mary Kay, just in terms of the adaptability of families as well as our children in terms of all of the different models. So all of that is combining to make us feel really concerned. And I'm thinking back, Kevin, to when we first did this. I think it was April 21st. And I think I kept saying, when we open up again, when we open up again. And I think that parents are feeling particularly exhausted as our kids, and that now we're going into this sort of dark winter, and the news isn't great, just like your map showed, in terms of more and more school districts going to the distance learning model. So it's hard to kind of keep being optimistic and sort of upbeat and, keeping our focus on the here and now and not getting ahead of ourselves as this is sort of stretching on to almost a year that we'll be dealing with this.
Let's flip it around for a second. Look at the other side of the coin. Do you know of any students who are doing better than expected academically?
Yes, so it was interesting to hear Mary Kay talk about her daughter, because so many of our students who have anxiety disorders, who are on the spectrum, who have difficulty in a large school environment, who have difficulty adapting to classrooms, to a lot of transitions throughout the day. Parents and those children themselves have told me they prefer not going to school, that they enjoy sort of getting on Zoom and entering classes where they're in their sweats and they haven't had to sort of gear up for a lot of what's unpredictable. So what we see are children responding to that sort of predictable routine in the home setting where the comfort level is there, and they seem to be doing better. The concern is that they don't have the social aspect to deal with. And what we know about children in general is that they are going to be socialized in groups throughout their lives. So that's the importance of the social and emotional piece that's certainly lacking in that full-time home program.
So I'm sure if these children are special education students, they would have IEP goals for social or emotional difficulties. How much of the slide are you seeing in these areas as compared to the academic slide?
So it seems to, it certainly depends on the disability and the range of involvement. But if there's concerns in both areas, if they're in the distance learning model at home, they're missing out on those opportunities to make connections with other kids. What I see is that the connections happen more in terms of the child and the teacher. I've been able to observe via Zoom or other platforms, a child having their speech and language therapy, their occupational therapy. And I have to say that what I've observed has been pretty impressive in terms of the level of engagement and certainly how hard the teacher or therapist works to sort of keep that level of engagement. And what's harder is when other kids appear on the screen for various reasons. I mean, it's hard when we do it, who's muted, who's not muted, those kinds of things. So that can be challenging. And so I think that, schools as well as parents have to work especially hard to maintain while we're social distancing, that we're not socially isolating. And that's a challenge.
That would be a challenge, definitely. So we know the COVID slide exists. It's a real thing. It affects lots of students, not just special education students. But for our children, it seems to affect them more. The effect is magnified. Oh, if only for the reasons that made our kids eligible for special education in the first place.
Right.
What can be done to combat the COVID slide?
So, in terms of the social and emotional aspect, to be in consistent contact with the school and the school team, certainly alerting them to any concerns that parents may be having, looking at the goals and objectives on the IEP in terms of what was set out for that child initially and how that's going to be addressed, whether it's the distance model or the in-school model. And I know that some districts have made a particular effort in adopting curriculum in terms of emotional intelligence, so that they're working to provide activities as well as social skills groups, those kinds of things, to bring in and emphasize the social and emotional aspect of this sort of new environment. And in terms of what parents can do to prevent that slide academically, it is a huge challenge. You want to, just like Audra and Mary Kay said, you want to know what's happening in terms of the IEP goals. You want to really be familiar with the kinds of daily or weekly assessments that the school is doing to really give a clear picture of where the child's skill levels are. And you want to also, in terms of children who are at home or having difficulty accessing the curriculum via the distance learning model, unfortunately, it does fall to parents to really explore some of the educational apps that are available or the websites that are available. Use of things like practice workbooks when the screen doesn't work, with lots of reinforcement for sort of doing an activity that may be less inviting, but certainly more crucial in terms of math skills, memory skills, those kinds of things. And then parents just need to really inspire their children to read, and I mean read anything. I don't care what it is, but the reading is a huge component. And then parents have talked to me about reviewing some of the previous testing that's been done. So things like the Vineland or anything that's been done in adaptive behaviors, where you want to look and say, my child needs practice crossing the street in town. Let's go do that for an afternoon. My child needs practice going to the bank. And even if banks have been pretty empty, actually, doing some of those daily living skills out in the community and sort of keeping track, whether it's daily living skills at home, in terms of family chores, personal chores, those kinds of things, to sort of utilize this time that we have together to really get a sense of where the gaps are and what we can do as parents to really help fill those gaps in the time that we have with our children.
I came across an interesting report. It's from Texas. As you probably recall, the federal government sent out coronavirus aid money months ago. And in Texas, the State Department of Education allocated $30 million of the coronavirus aid money the state received to offer one-time grants to families for up to $1,500 to use for therapy, tutoring, and other services. What do you think of this approach?
You know, it would be phenomenal if that was available to parents. I know that parents of means are, utilizing private tutors for their children, SAT prep, college counseling, those kinds of things. And unfortunately, the virus has really, while it has affected everybody, there's still an inequality about it. And so something like that would make a huge difference in a child's life, just providing that additional tutoring, that additional support for parents, just in terms of respite from not being the parent and the teacher at the same time. So, I mean, this whole experience is going to take a huge amount of money to really help our children really attain the goals that they should be doing and learning. Because when we think about, almost a year of this affecting them, and when we're talking about the sort of loss in terms of skills, it's almost like a year to a year. A year's loss to a year. And so it's going to take a year to regain those skills that have been lost. And I think that we all have to be extraordinarily invested in helping to secure those funds, so that education is just as important as the airline industry in terms of, putting there, it's going to be well utilized, and the benefit to our society is going to be extraordinary.
I agree.
I'm off the soapbox.
Well, just to hop on the box now that you're off of it, too many people with an adult weight, and I don't mean today, I mean for decades, have been willing to give lip service to education and the importance of our children, and they have failed to come through for decades and decades and decades. This isn't a comment on the current political situation in Washington, D.C. This just seems to be the American way. Now,
Yes.
we know this
Mhm.
COVID slide exists, and there's another slide going on too. I've observed it in the parents and the students who I work with. It's an emotional slide, a slide in the emotional health of our children and in parents too. Are you seeing this in the families you work with also?
Yes, and I think even the last time I was here, I was concerned that our kids are not all right, and that was just prior to school beginning. Um, I find that I'm more impressed with the our children's ability to tell me about these sort of complicated models that they're experiencing. One boy marched into my office, and when I said, "So, are you in school? What's happening?" He rattled off a schedule that I have no idea how he sort of keeps this in his short-term and then long-term memory. So he goes to school for half a day, and it's every other day, and that he's in middle school, so the schedule is a revolving one. And then he's home for 2.5 days, but now that he has an IEP, he's going to be staying 2 more. It was just so complicated. And when I said to him, "So how is the virtual learning, how is the distant learning working for you?" And he goes, "I'm so bored with it. Everything I learn is on YouTube." So it's just, it was almost like his giving, while he could recite his schedule to me, he had like sort of totally given up on the learning piece. And it was like, I'm doing this myself. And so, with that comes, a certain amount of anxiety, some mild depression, some more severe depression in some kids, kids who thrive in being with their friends, being socially connected. I saw a boy who's extraordinarily isolated, and he's on a distance learning because both of his parents have severe health issues. So he is totally isolated from his peer group. He's a boy who played contact sports and doesn't have that available to him at this point. It was very difficult for him to really describe what he does for fun, because he said, "Actually, I lost all my fun." So when we talk about kids across the spectrum and sort of how they're doing, it is challenging for them, and it's something that we have to be extraordinarily aware of in terms of any kind of regression in skills, any kind of regression in normal daily functions, whether it's sleeping, eating, toileting, loss of interest in things that they used to enjoy. And so I think that parents have to be very vigilant about how their kids are doing.
Is the only solution the eventual return to normalcy that we're all hoping for, and maybe hoping for a little bit more now with the announcement of breakthrough when it comes to the vaccine?
The vaccine,
Uh,
right?
what can parents do until things get back to normal? It's like at one time life was good, and life's going to be good again too.
Mhm.
The problem is that it's right now.
Right.
So when it comes to the emotional health of our children, uh, what else can parents do to help preserve their emotional health without seeing regression, without seeing things that we don't want to see, until things are better and they have some good solid reasons to
Right.
feel better?
So, I mean, I think that parents need to accept that there has been this disruption, that there may be a loss in skills, and that's the price that we're paying to keep our children and our families safe. So this disruption is to protect our families, to protect our communities. And I think that parents have to recognize when their children are stressed, know where to, really set firm limits in terms of engagement, in terms of academics, and know when to let that go, and sort of know that we need to have family enjoyment time to work really hard, as Mary Kay said, in terms of exploring state parks, sort of when to sort of let go and sort of recognize that we're all together and what we can do to make life a little bit more pleasant on a daily basis. So it's those times of joy. And I think, again, going into the holiday season, where these holidays are going to be different than usual, and sort of how to explain that to our children, and know that that we're going to find joy and comfort in things that are slightly different, that it's not going to be the same as it was, but it's going to be. We are going to have a Thanksgiving, we are going to have a Christmas, and we are going to celebrate being together.
Well, for parents, families, accepting all that, accepting that things are going to be different, it's a bitter pill to swallow.
It is.
It certainly is. Adrienne Smaller, thank you so much for joining us on Answers. And that pretty much wraps it up for this edition.
Thank you, Kevin.
Cindy Curtis is joining us. Thank you, Cindy, for all you've done. And again, Dr. Smaller, my thanks to you. And we will see you, hopefully, on December 8th, Tuesday at 6 p.m. as the journey continues.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you. Good night.
Stay safe and well.